Ja, wir kommen zum zweiten Teil des Nachmittagsprogramm des Innovationscampuses. Wir kommen jetzt zu Tristan Horks. Tristan Horks ist uns online zugeschaltet. Der ist Zukunftsforscher und internationaler Speaker aus der Generation Y. In seinem Vortrag Die Zielgruppe von morgen behandelt er die immer schneller werdenden Veränderungen der In seinem Vortrag Die Zielgruppe von morgen behandelt er die immer schneller werdenden Veränderungen der Lebensstile und Lebensphasen der jüngeren Generation und wie sich trotz der stark ausgeprägten Individualisierungen trotzdem Zielgruppen bilden lassen. Meine Damen und Herren, Tristan Horks.
Vielen herzlichen Dank für die Einladung, die digitale Einladung bei den österreichischen Tourismustagen. Mein Name ist, wie Sie schon gehört haben, Tristan Horks. Ich komme aus diesem ominösen Feld der Trend- und Zukunftsforschung und beschäftige mich sehr viel
I'm
mit
afraid the sound is terrible and the interpreter cannot hear. Now the sound is gone.
Ein bisschen referieren. Denn wir haben ein kleines Problem mit der Generationsthematik. Meistens
There
ist
is no
das Marketing immer
sound.
sehr daran interessiert, Zielgruppen zu finden. Und das macht man sehr gerne anhand von Alter. Und deswegen sind Generationen für Marketing auch immer ganz interessant. Nun, es gibt ein kleines Problemchen mit den Generationen. Es ist nämlich so, dass 50% der Leute wissen gar nicht, welcher Generation sie angehören. Im Weltkrieg großteils wieder aufgebaut. Nur wie das möglich und andererseits auch aufgrund der Mittel sehr, sehr schwer.
So this generation can and they have worked for a long time, so they want to travel. They worked all their lives, so it's an agile group who likes tourism. Then we come to the next generation, the Generation X, and that's the lost generation. I'm so sorry for you if you are of this generation, and it's the generation, the no future generation. They were very scared in the times around the Cold War, and this is why they said, anyway, we don't have any future anyway, so let's just party. This is also a smaller generation because the baby boomer generation was a bit bigger, so they had problems to go into the zeitgeist and to go into this movement. And they don't come into this big position. Oh, they're coming to these boss and CEO generation, and they don't rebel as much, and they worked a lot, and now they are becoming CEOs. And then we have the Generation Y, my generation, the Millennials, a generation that really wants. Why they want so much is not so clear. It's the first generation that is digital, the first digital generation. It's the generation that started growing up. They had a Walkman, but they already went direction of an iPod. This generation was the post-materialist generation. It's a very interesting generation when it comes to traveling. If I become a bit full of empathy, I want to collect moments, not things. The generation, you know, we also call them Generation Instagram, and they try and get moments and experience. And this in tourism and traveling works really well. Mobility was the status symbol of this generation, and is the symbol of this generation. And they go back through. Now it's not simple as for traveling anymore for this generation, because They don't really have the status symbol. Now we come to the last generation, the Generation Z, or Z as the Americans would say. They're the youngest generation. They are just starting either their jobs or university or school. And also the TikTok generation is a bit cynical saying that, but they're actually the generation that we also call them Generation TikTok, and they grew up in a totally digital world. And they are were brought up with a touch screen, so this generation is a bit more pragmatical than the previous generation. And my generation, the Millennials, is the generation of the why, who asks the why of things. And this generation says, why consume so much? Can't we just travel, etc.? With the crisis generation, where the generation grew up with, is a generation that went onto the streets with Friday for Future. They're more pragmatic and they're more enchanted. They have this enchantment rather than my generation. And if you look at the birth, now we need a new generation. It's 2 years now since COVID. We've got the new generation since between 20 and 22, a new generation. And I heard they're coronials after the millennials. I don't think it's a very nice wording, but we call them generation crisis as well. And the beautiful thing about this generation is that this generation has now been born in the crisis, and it always takes a bit of time until they bring in the zeitgeist, so and start working, and they start being part of the society. So this generation will tell us whether they've learned from experience of crisis or not. And it's so nice, these little babies, and maybe we should make a future for these babies, because if we only just think about age categories, this is the group of tomorrow. What they look like, we're coming to that. So now I'd like to have a look at the life reality and also the curriculum vitae of these people, from the baby boomers until up to the youngest that we have, and the changes. And what you see in front of yourself is the industrial life model. And with this, we're going to look at the life of people. With my experience, it's like a misunderstanding, because we say, okay, people functions this way. You're a young person until you're 20, then you get married at the age of 23, you have a family, buy a house, and you work 40 years, mostly the same job, and you go up into the career scale, you have a big car, and then you have 5.5 years before you fall out of the statistics as a pensioner. That sounds very cynical again, but as we all know, life doesn't work anymore, that you're a child, an adolescent, an adult, and then an old person, and then you die. What we see as a generational concept, and the problem of the younger generation, is how can we get the younger generation? How can we understand them? It bases on this big misunderstanding. We think this is how you have that age, and that you're in that phase, and should be in this and that way. That no longer exists. For example, if the 6-7 phase model is the one I'm going to show you, which is a bit closer to the reality that we have. You have the childhood and the youth, and they're not the same anymore. Then we've got the rush hour. That's the phase where we want to have career, because later we're going to have children. So I'm probably in the rush hour age, I have to say, I'm afraid. And then we have the selfness phase, when you create a family and get a family, and you certainly have time to become more mature. It does take a while until you mature, and then maybe a bit of wisdom. But what has also changed incredibly is that some people think it has to do with traveling and tourism, but it doesn't have anything to do with traveling and tourism. What has really changed is also the career impulse, the pulsation of the career. Until we were 20, we were doing a traineeship, and then we started working or studying and going then to working. And then you probably know this also, of the lifelong learning that we just go through, and we've got to continue learning. And due to these different life phases, we always have different life positions, also desires to travel. It's not the case that due to this change of pulsation that we also want to go to different places and visit places, and it's not really a surprise that a CV looks in a different way, that you go from the village to the town, and then you have a family, and you say go back into the countryside. So once the children are adult, you go back into the town. Nowadays, we have more fluid ways. I mean, we can't really put people into categories anymore that we used to do. What's also changed a lot, and which makes us a big difference, is how we travel and the relationships, but let's leave that aside. Right, then if we're talking about the individual life, we have a kind of a step pattern. So we go up the scales of the steps, and it's quite nice to have a look at this. Us as a society, it's nice to have childhood, then we have the youth, then we have adulthood, and we come to wisdom. And I think wisdom is a very nice goal to achieve. And once you go one step further, you have to go through a crisis, and this crisis actually forces us into a transformation. I mean, in the German language, we don't want to know this, that we go through a transformation. It's maybe a cultural issue, that a crisis is actually a good transformation and helps us to improve. And I think that tourism has felt this very strongly, that we are in a crisis, but that we should actually have a look at the chances for regional and also quality tourism. In an individual life, we always want to go one step further. The problem is with this that we have the crisis and we do not want the crisis. We negate them. So we have these lapses, and then sometimes we get stuck in them. So there are so many possibilities in life which we don't want to go through. So we say, okay, we can have a regression, and then is even more possibles than that I don't want to go into detail with. So having said that, we also have inside of these crises and inside of these pathways, we also have some chances. So if we have a look at the older model that I showed you before, the industrial model, we used to have two crisis points. We had, first of all, creating a family, and then maybe buying a house, and etc. This is the crisis. And the second crisis that we have is the social cultural crisis, and this is okay for society, and that's the midlife crisis. We know the midlife crisis. If we say the younger generation and the group of tomorrow is going to have a lot more crisis than the youngest generation now, and we know that crisis can be thought through due to traveling. So the younger generation is always falling into a crisis, or we see a chance in the younger generation to say life is more individualized and there are more phases in their lives. And so we can say from that, okay, we have different phases of life and they have different necessities, which also means that the person who's important, and then people keep changing and changing and changing. You can't hold on to these generational drawers. And this is going to be a mistake, putting these generations into drawers. If we have a look at the generations again in front of us, then we see here this problem that I talked about previously, that if the lifespan is within the generation and there's a change in generation and they still stay to get them into the prior life category, then it's not okay. I think what's happening here, if we go from the boomer world and we go to say, and that the industry gets better and better and better, and maybe you're a bit frightened of the future and you have this no future attitude. No, we have this millennium, which is my generation, where I got a bit disappointed. The Generation Z that we want, but they are so uncertain of life and they're looking for safety. And then what's the next generation going to be there? It's the end of the beginning of the end. It's the doom time. Okay, so we start individualizing that the generation crisis is going to be beyond generation X, Y, Z, and Boomer, and we're going to take them all along. And I am sure that this generation, and it's going to become more and more difficult to go through classical socio-demographic attitudes. To have a look at this, it's the complexity of the life, but also that people become more and more differentiated, and that's the privilege that we have, that we can individualize ourselves and we can go back to what we'd like to do. And we also, if we really have a nice age group, then we need a really, really, really crisis. And maybe it sounds a bit strange for us, but the crises of our times have always, we've always been through them in a very good way. It's not like that afterwards we have a totally same generational group. Having said this, these are the values of the generation seen. It's not age generation, and it's going to be seen in many people. On the one hand, the individualization. So we're always more individualized, but we also have the counter trend. So we're looking for the us. We're looking to be earthed and rooted. The gender shift also, all the topic about gender and equality, which is also very strong in all these generations. And is now more, a topic that we've talked a lot about, and I think we've understood it as a society. Digitalization. It's not just the youngest generation that is digitalized. Of course, they're more digital than, but also the Generation X and Y, my generation, and Z are also digital, and they want to be reached digitally. So if we think only those, we can send them letters, and the other ones for smartphones, and the next generation just the metaverse, I think that's not the case. I don't think the younger generation wants to travel in the metaverse. I don't think so. New work. new work culture. I talked about it previously. That's also our role in traveling and in the tourism branch. And here I'd like to say also that new areas bring new inspirations, and we've got concepts in the modern working world and the working world of tomorrow. So the work in on holiday. So this is a really interesting group as well that we underestimate. And then we've got ecology. I mean, ecology is also the same with the topic of gender shift. It's a topic that we've been through. It's not if, it's how. And a country such as Austria has a big advantage that they have nature, ecology, and culture, and it's all connected. And I think here we need measures. But what is a counter trend is the mass tourism. So this is quite difficult with a lot of people to be able to make ecological regional tourism with these people. And lastly, it's safety. Due to all these crises that we've been through, safety and the search for safety is growing and growing and growing. It's not just about physical safety, it's also digital safety. This whole discussion around data security, etc., and who is hacking me and all this cyber criminality, etc., this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So due to the war at the moment, we've got, again, desire physical security and safety, but the digital world is also a big topic that needs more and more safety. And once the war is over, it's going to come back as well. I'd like to end by saying how tourism has actually changed and in which direction we're heading to. So if we start comparing the world of tourism and where it was and where it is and where we are at the moment, and maybe to get a feeling of how it's going to change. So the trips from yesterday were continuous concept holidays. So we book a holiday, we have a specific idea that we want to consume, and then we want to come back home so that we can go back to work. And it was more of a kind of a numbing of what we're going through. And this and the industrialization, we just want to, in the holiday, we just want to get away from the daily chores, and all we want to work for is for the next holiday, and then we numb ourselves in the holiday. But nowadays it's different. Nowadays we want to live things, we want to lose ourselves, we want to find ourselves, we want to find the word Airbnb slow travel and this not fast speed traveling. So am I here to consume the holiday, or do I want to have new experiences that are going to change me and going to also have an effect on me? I want to be in the here and now. So it's no longer this numbing effect. It's more this being in the now, being in the present, and to get lost inside the present. So this is something new, a new aspect, a new idea. And we are going from all these experience holidays to this finding oneself and being part of the identity, being part of the traveling, finding oneself. This is my generation. And then there's this very nice thing that I said before, which is called the workation. So this mixture is a blending word work and vacation or workation. And this is what many people do, and it sounds totally perverted in the industry. You know, how can you work and be on holiday at the same time? I'm going to give you an Austrian example. You can imagine, for example, that you go into the Alps and you go skiing in the morning, or you go walking, and then in the afternoon, instead of doing the après-ski, because we all know that après-ski is not as cool as it used to be, they just sit down and you get the new inspiration of your surroundings. And you use these surroundings to be creative in your work. That doesn't work in all the jobs that you have, but especially for the digital creative jobs, this is possible because these are the mobile customers that we have, or people that we have, and then where you get inspired by the environment and you're sitting in your hut and you can work differently and you have different access to the world. Then thanks to the internet, it is possible also, to sit in a wooden hut and do what you need to do. And I think that's the world in which we find ourselves. And we're going to find ourselves in the next few years, the next 15 years, and where we have a trip as a method to the means, because we're quite mobile and we can live life, we're traveling, and maybe also be ecological in your means of transport, and that this will be the world of tomorrow that we are heading to in the next 10, 15 years. So what is the farther future? So the farther future, that means the day after tomorrow, That might just sound totally as a utopy or a dystopy. To be mobile and to be traveling could be absolutely normal. That you're in new communities, in new areas, and you find each other and you find yourselves and you find good, but then you continue where the classical marketing image or the classical TripAdvisor doesn't work anymore and everything's digital, and this digital intelligence is being found. And this is called resonance tourism. Resonance is quite similar to the co-living, co, and that actually means this wave with each other, wavelength, and being on the same wave level. And in the ideal case, we have this hyper-mobile world of the day after tomorrow, where workation is absolutely normal, and the co-workation is you're traveling to be able to meet people from different surroundings, to be together and inspire each other and ourselves on different areas. So in a sense, this is that we are traveling and that we are kind of in this new mode, this new wave. And I mean, I like to see it as, for example, you're with the tourists, you're with the home people, but in a way we're still in this tourist idea of yesterday, to be able to consume it. If tourists should come, consume it and go back home. But you know, this resonance tourist is that each and one has something from it, and that we're in different surroundings, and that they also bring something. And in the ideal case, they have come together, the people from there and the people traveling. So a big thank you to you, and I'm sure we're going to see each other in the future.